Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Ayin He, in which we plan to complete the 8th perek and begin the 9th perek. We've been talking about the 3 big sins for which one has to die rather than transgress, and one of them was Gilui Arayot. And now we have a famous story about an interesting case. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Maaseh be'adam echad shenatan einav be'isha achat ve'ela libo tina. Rav says that there was a certain person who set his eyes on a certain woman, and he had a passion for her. You could call this a sickness, love sickness. And he said, I have to be with her or else I will die. So they came and asked the doctors, is there any remedy to this person? He's going to die. This is sakanat nefashot. Unless he's with this person, do you have a medication or a therapy? And the doctor said, sorry, we have no other medication except for him to have intercourse with that woman, and then he'll be better. So they asked the Chachamim, what's the halacha? Is he allowed? Are we going to allow him to be with this woman to save his life? And they said, no, let him die and not have intercourse with her. Talmud lefanav aruma. So then the doctor said, well, how about if she just stands before him naked? So then he's not touching her or anything, but maybe that will be enough to cure his sickness. And the rabbi said, no, yamut v'al talmud lefanav aruma. Let him die, and she may not stand before him naked. Tisaper imo ma'achorei hagader. And then the next suggestion the doctor said is, how about if she goes behind the fence and just speaks to him? Maybe just by hearing her words from some conversation, whatever he wants to talk about. Maybe it will be a PG-13 conversation, whatever it is that they talk about. Maybe just hearing her voice will calm him and make him better. And they said, no, yamut velo tisaper imo ma'achorei hagader. Let him die and not even talk to him behind the curtain. So this is a kind of a surprising story, because we know from yesterday that Gilui Arayot, that's if it's something that's irva, one of the prohibited relations one cannot do. But these things, just standing in front of someone or conversing behind the fence, like, is this a major sin? So why is this is not why is this included that in a law that he should die? Why don't we say, well, his life is at stake. Why don't we want to save the guy's life? So let's see. Peligi bar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachmani. There's 2 opinions about this. What are the facts of the case? What was the status of this woman? One of these Amoraim say that she was a married woman, and one says that no, she was a single woman. Now, if she was married, that makes sense. If this lovesick man would have relations with her, that would be adultery. That's clear, Gilui Arayot, and you have to die rather than commit adultery. So that's for sure. We understand at least the having relations with her. We still don't fully explain the standing before him or speaking to him. That's because that's not technically a violation of Gilui Arayot. You wouldn't get the death penalty for that. But if she's single, well then, why did the rabbi say no? If she's single, it's not technically Gilui Arayot. There's no death penalty here. There's other lower prohibitions regarding a pinuya, but it's not classified under Gilui Arayot. It's not chayab mita. It's not karet, and so why did the rabbis disallow all these cases? Rav Papa amar mishum pegam mishpacha. Rav Acha bered Rav Ika amar kedesh shelo yehu benot Yisrael perusot ba'arayot. So 2 opinions. Rav Papa says it's because of the flaw for the family name. If the rabbis would allow, let's say she's pinuya, okay, it's not death penalty, gilui arayot, fine, but what will people say about this family? They'll say, oh, did you know this woman woman, this guy was lovesick, and she slept with him. What does that say about her? What does that say about the family? People are going to look at that family in a degraded way. Who's going to want to marry her, marry into the family? And so we want to protect the reputation of the family. So we say no, and that may explain why you can't stand before her or talk with her. She can't stand before him or talk with him, because all this would be, people would talk about it, and it would be a disgrace for the family. Ravacha says not just for the family, for her herself. We don't want the woman of Israel to be involved in promiscuous relations. Now, it's going to happen. Every other guy is going to be, I'm lovesick for this and for that. And if she's single, then you're just going to allow it. So, see, this is different from a typical case of something that's let's say a lower prohibition. Like someone says, put a gun to your head, eat pig or die. Okay, then you should eat the pig. We're talking about when it's in private and not a time of persecution. So you eat the pig. There's no victim here to the fact that you ate pig. Okay, what could you do? But here, this man sinning and saving his life sinning involves someone else. Someone else has to be degraded, has to put themselves in a compromising position in order to fulfill this guy's needs. She has to also violate a sin, even if it's a lower sin, but still, can you make someone else commit a sin in order to save a different person's life? So this is a different story, and we don't want this thing happening. It's going to become widespread, and women have to put themselves in a degrading, promiscuous situation. We don't want that. Better that this guy should die. That's his problem, and let him, think about something else and get over it. Or even if he dies, too bad. That's his problem, and you can't make someone else have to suffer or their family suffer because of it. Now we ask, hold on, if she's single, we have an easy solution. Let him marry her, and then it's permitted. It won't be pirusot ba'arayot. There won't be any problem with the family, because they're going to do a beautiful wedding. They'll do it in the Plaza Hotel. Everybody will think it's fantastic, and they can go, and he can be with her, and then he won't be lovesick anymore. So why don't they suggest that? La meyatva da'ateh k'de Rabbi Yitzchak tamar Rabbi Yitzchak meyom shecharav bet hamikdash nitela tam bi'ah v'nitena le'obreh avera shene'emar ma'im genubim himtaku v'lechem setarim yin'am. And it says, no, it won't cure him. And we know this because of the teaching of Rabbi Yitzchak, who said, from the time that the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, the taste, the pleasure of sexual intercourse was given only to those who sin. In other words, those who do it in a permitted way, it's good. There is some pleasure, but those who do it illegally, those who violate adultery or other gilui arayot, they have the enjoyment for it especially well. And this is the fulfillment of the pasuk, Ma'im genubim, stolen waters are sweeter. If you drink your own water, that's all right. But if you steal someone else's water, it tastes better. It tastes even better. Bread eaten in secret, if you steal bread and enjoy it and then eat it, you enjoy it better. So this guy, the lovesick man, he would only get better if he engaged in prohibited relations. That's part of the cure. If he marries her and is permitted, then it won't help him. So you see, this person really has a more serious problem, and he actually wants to do something that's illegal. So the rabbis say, all right, we're not going to have any patience for this guy. If that's his only solution, well, then I guess he's going to have to die. Hadran alach ben sorer umoreh. And chazakim ubruchim for completing this perek. We now begin the 9th perek that starts Ve'eluhen hanisrafin. In the previous perek, we listed all the people that get sikila, and so now a new topic. The following people deserve the death penalty by burning, which we already explained is not burning from the outside, but burning from the inside with pouring molten lead down their throat. And this is the cases. Haba al isha ubita ubat kohen shezinta. If someone has relations with a woman and her daughter, they could be his own wife and a daughter from his wife's previous marriage, or even if he's not married, anytime someone has relations with a woman, he cannot have relations with that woman's daughter or mother, and we'll see how this expands into grandmother and so on. And also also bat kohen, a bat kohen who commits adultery, which we've spoken about somewhat already. Now the Mishnah continues. Yesh bichlal isha ubitaha bito ubat bito ubat beno. Ubat ishto, ubat bitaha, ubat bena, chamoto, ve'em chamoto, ve'em chamiv. Included in the prohibition that the Torah says that one cannot be with a woman and her daughter is also going to be his daughter, and this would include his daughter even with a woman out of wedlock. And if he had relations with the mother of this daughter, and then with this daughter, it's also his own daughter, which is a different prohibition. But this from here we'll learn that he would deserve burning because he was with the mother and the daughter, and not only daughter but also granddaughter, and granddaughter could be from his daughter's daughter or son's daughter, and also the daughter of his wife. So that's from a previous marriage that the wife had a daughter, so he's with the wife and that daughter, or his wife's granddaughter, which includes both the wife's daughter's daughter or the wife's son's daughter, and it also includes going up generations. His wife and his mother-in-law, or his grandmother-in-law, or the grandmother-in-law from his father-in-law. In other words, his mother-in-law's mother, or his father-in-law's mother. He can't be with his wife and her grandmother, either grandmother. That all these cases, the two people involved would both get serefa. And so here's a nice chart so that we can keep track of this. Here's the guy who's transgressing. So first we talked about kids that he has with his own wife. So he's married to this woman, so he's already with her. That's permitted. That's totally good. That's okay. But then if he sins with their daughter, or their daughter's daughter, or son's daughter. Anybody in blue stripe gets serefa. These other people are also prohibited, but not through serefa if they're in orange polka dot. Okay, so that's the beginning of the Mishnah, is including these cases. And then we have from the wife's family. If the wife had a family with the former husband, so she was married before, and she had a daughter and a son. And then she second marriage to this guy, this transgressor, and he is with her. He is not allowed then to be with his wife's daughter or his wife's granddaughters, either from the daughter or son. And also, he cannot be with his wife's mother-in-law or his wife's grandmother, and that includes maternal grandmother or paternal grandmother. And in all these cases, it doesn't actually matter if he is married to these women or not married to them. The point is, once someone has relations with a woman, any woman, then that automatically makes him prohibited to all of her daughters going down generations, and mother and grandmother going up generations. That is the Mishnah. Okay, now the Gemara will explain further. Haba alisha shenasa bita lakatane ela haba alisha ubita. Notice that the Mishnah does not say if someone has relations with a woman after having married the daughter. It doesn't say that case, which we would think is a typical case. A person's married to a woman, and then he can't be with the mother of that person, right? That would make sense that we would expect the Mishnah to say. The reason why we'd expect that is because look at the pasuk from which we learn this law from. We're going to quote this a few times. V'ish asher yikach et isha ve'et imaha zimahi be'esh yisrefu oto ve'eten ve'lo tiyeh zimah betochechem. So the pasuk does not talk about a mother and daughter, but rather a wife and daughter, but rather a wife and her mother, a mother-in-law. And so it says, anyone who takes a woman and her mother, that's called zima, that's going to be a key word, and they will be burnt. Oto, him, that's the man who perpetrates. Ve'eten, this is curious, eten is in plural, and them. Well, who's them? It's not the wife. He was allowed to marry the isha, that she was a permitted woman, right, assuming, but then it says her and her mother. Really, if he's with the wife, that's okay. If he's with the mother-in-law, that's when they both get burnt. So it really should say oto ve'otah. So we're going to discuss that in a minute. And that way there will not be zima amongst you. While we're looking at the Pesukim, this is the Pasuk that has the punishment, but there's also a Pasuk here in 2 chapters before. It says, Advat Isha ubita lo tegale. Here it does say it as a woman and her daughter. And also Vet bat bena, Vet bat bita, and also the granddaughter from the son or from the daughter. Lo tikach legalot advata shara henna zimahi. So all these Pesukim will be important. Okay, anyway, right now the Gemara is noticing that the Mishnah does not say it in the way that we might expect if someone is with a woman after having married the daughter of that woman. So then you would say he's permitted to marry that daughter, but now he's prohibited from the daughter's mother. It doesn't say that. Ela habal isha ubitaha miklal de tadvaihu leisura. It says someone who has relations with a woman and her daughter, which sounds like both of them are prohibited to him, right? Because it doesn't say a woman after having legally married the daughter. It says a woman or her daughter, both of them would be prohibited. So what case would that be talking about? Umanihu chamoto ve'em chamoto. Must be that the Mishnah is referring to someone who has sins with his mother-in-law and his grandmother-in-law. Both of them are prohibited to him. He's permitted to his wife, that's fine, but then if he is with either his mother-in-law or his grandmother-in-law. So that's what that must be. That is what the Mishnah is talking about. So it's not necessarily a peshat reading of the Mishnah, but technically, if you want to really read, someone who is with either isha or bita, they would get burnt. Then it would have to be both that are prohibited. Ve'katane yesh bichlal isha ubitaha miklal de tarvayu ketibi behedya v'hanach miderasha atya. And now later, the second part of the Mishnah says within the case of isha ubita, which we just interpreted to mean mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law, within that is included other cases. So that means that these two are mentioned explicitly. If it's using this as the paradigm, the Mishnah here says, right, this is the paradigm, isha ubita, and we just explained that means not a wife, but rather mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law, isha ubita. And so that means that these are the ones that are explicit in the Torah. And then it says, there's other cases that are not explicit in the Torah, but we're going to derive it from them. So that means these two have to be explicit in the Torah. So, and the rest of them we're going to learn from a derasha. So how do we see, where do we see grandmother-in-law in the Torah explicitly? Well, we're going to see it according to one opinion. This will work for Abaye, who says that regarding a machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael, he says they actually agree on the law, they're just disagreeing about the interpretation of a pasuk. This comes from a sugya that we're actually going to see tomorrow, but there's no way to understand the sugya over here without actually learning it. So it's a relatively short sugya, so we'll do it today as well. It says, Tenura banan, oto ve'et hen, oto ve'et achat mehen, divrei Rabbi Ishmael. The pasuk says, you kill, the pasuk we saw, him and them. What do you mean them? It should be only one of them. If a person is with his wife and then his mother-in-law, so his wife doesn't get killed, that was a permitted relation, only his mother-in-law. So Rabbi Ishmael says, it means him and one of them. Only one of them gets killed. If he's with his wife, then that's fine. And then his mother-in-law, he will get killed, and his mother-in-law will get killed. It doesn't mean both of them, it means one of them. Rabbi Akiva omer, oto ve'et shetehen. Rabbi Akiva says, no, both of them are liable. So what's he talking about? It must be that Rabbi Akiva is talking about, a mother-in-law and a grandmother-in-law. A person is with either of them, right? Both of them. Then either of them will get killed. Whoever he's with will get killed. If he's with both of them will get killed. My benaihu, amar Abaye, mashmut dorshim ika benaihu. So now we have two interpretations of this machloket. Abaye says they agree on all the bottom line laws. They just disagree about how to interpret the Pesukim. Rabbi Ishmael sabar oto ve'eten, oto ve'et achat mehen, sheken belashon yevani korin la'achat henna. Bishmael says it means you kill him and one of them. After all, in Greek, you say, how do you say one in Greek? Henna. Also like in English, one. And so, curiously, he's interpreting the Hebrew eten to be like a Greek word, which is really strange because the Torah is in Hebrew, not in Greek. But that's how Bishmael is interpreting it. It means that you kill one of them, meaning only one of this pair is liable to the death penalty, not the wife, but rather the mother-in-law. But it means mother-in-law. However, the grandmother-in-law, that will only learn from a derasha. It's not explicit in the Pesukim. Rabbi Akiva sabar oto ve'eten, oto ve'etshitehen, ve'en em chamoto hacha ketiba. Rabbi Akiva says no. Him and them means both of them. That means the mother-in-law and the grandmother-in-law. So Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva both agree that a grandmother-in-law is prohibited. The question is only, is it explicit? Rabbi Akiva would say this is explicit, and it's not really explicit. We wouldn't call it that. But since it does say eten, it has to refer to two people, and two people that would deserve the death penalty. It's not the wife. She doesn't deserve any punishment. They're allowed. But rather, mother and mother-in-law. And so that is Abaye's position. If we come back to our Gemara, we explain. According to Abaye, we can understand our Mishnah. Since they agree in principle, but they disagree on where to derive it from. So who would be the author of our Mishnah? It would be Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva is the one that says that the Torah says explicitly both mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law, and so that's why the opening of the Mishnah says Habal Isha Ubita, and that refers to grandmother-in-law and mother-in-law, and so these are the paradigms that are in the Torah, and then we will derive everything else from that. So the Mishnah reads smoothly according to Rabbi Akiva within the interpretation of Abaye. However, there is another interpretation. This is now going back to tomorrow's daf. Rava Amar Chamoto lachar mita ika benaihu. Rava says there is a practical difference between Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva for halacha, and that would be a case of one's mother-in-law after the death of his wife. Rabbi Ishmael savar chamoto lachar mita bisrefa. Rabbi Akiva savar isura be'alma. If someone is married to a woman, that's his wife. Good, he's permitted to his wife. He's prohibited to his mother-in-law, and that's certainly true while his wife is alive. The question is, now his wife dies. What do we do in that case? Rabbi Ishmael says, even after his wife dies, a person is still prohibited to his mother-in-law. Why? Because he interpreted eten to mean one, still with the Greek one. So that means if a person is with a woman and one of them, meaning even if one of them is alive, even if his wife died and only his mother-in-law is alive, still the prohibition remains. So tov eten, that the eten refers to one of them is alive, then still the other one, meaning if his mother-in-law only is alive and his wife is dead, still she is prohibited bisrefa. That's how he understands it. However, Rabbi Akiva says shetehen refers to both of them, the wife and the mother-in-law, and that means that only if they're both alive, then he's not allowed to be with his mother-in-law, and otherwise they'll get serefa. However, if the wife dies, then it's only isur. It's not totally permitted, but it won't be serefa. According to Rabbi Akiva, this would be in a way more similar to two sisters, where if someone's married to one sister, while that wife is alive, he is totally not allowed erva with the other sister. But once his first wife dies, then he's permitted to be with the other sister. In that case, it's totally permitted. Here, the mother-in-law would never be permitted, but once the wife dies, it goes down from serefa to being a simple prohibition. So that's Rava. So here's the thing. According to Rava, Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva agree that the pasuk is referring to a wife and a mother-in-law, not a grandmother-in-law. So according to Rava, there is no opinion according to which the Torah itself is referring to a grandmother-in-law, and so that's what we ask over here. He says that the pasuk, when it says shetehen, is referring to a wife and the mother-in-law only. And that's the question. Is the mother-in-law always prohibited, or only sometimes prohibited, but never. The pasuk is not talking about the grandmother-in-law at all. But we just said that the Mishnah in the first clause is talking about a mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law, and that those are both from the Torah. So who is the author? Amar lecha Rava teneh habal isha shenasa bita. Rava says, okay, change the words of the Mishnah and read instead of both of them, right? Habal isha ubita, indicating that there are two women who are both prohibited to him. No, read it as saying someone has relations with a woman after he married legally the daughter. So really, in fact, there's only one woman here that would be prohibited to him, bistrefa, because it's only the mother-in-law he had married, or permitted in a permitted way, the daughter. So once you change those words, either really change the words or just read it as with that understanding, then there's no problem according to Rava either. Now, the next clause says, Yesh bichlal isha bita, chamoto ve'em chamoto ve'em hamiv. So here's the problem. Once we interpreted the resha as we did to talk about a mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law, so then how do you understand the continuation? Within the prohibition of isha bita, if that phrase isha bita already means mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law, then why are you continuing and saying mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law from the mother or grandmother-in-law from the father, since that's already included, at least one of them. So how do you explain why the things that are already prohibited in the Torah are repeated again? According to Abaye, since it does have to say the father-in-law's mother, and that's not in the Torah. Torah doesn't say father-in-law's mother. So since it does have to add that, so for parallelism, it adds also mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law, meaning the mother-in-law's mother. Mother-in-law's mother is already included in the Torah, but just to fill it out, it says mother-in-law's mother, so that it could also say father-in-law's mother. According to Rava, here's a question: why mention chamoto? Because even according to Rava, we said he changes the beginning of the sentence. So grandmother-in-law is not included in the beginning of the Mishnah, but mother-in-law certainly, that's in the pasuk, that's for sure. Everybody agrees to that. So why does it say included in the prohibition is also mother-in-law? The mother-in-law is explicit in the prohibition. And so he'll answer, since it wants to say mother-in-law's mother and mother-in-law's father, so you have to say mother-in-law too, just to fill it out, just to give all the steps. So that's why he says mother-in-law, even though that's not an added derived law, that's part of the basic prohibition itself. Okay, now we go back to asking, what is the source? Because this Gemara hasn't even quoted the pasuk yet. דתנו רבנן, איש אשר ייקח את אישה ואת אמה, אין לי אלא אישה ואמה, בת אישה ובת ביתה ובת בנה, מנין? How do we know that the prohibition and the punishment of serefa applies to all the people on this list? As a Braita teaches us. The pasuk says, if a person, this is Vayikra 20, takes a woman and her mother, so that's mother-in-law, so I know for sure that that's the case. Now, I only know a wife and a mother-in-law, but what about a woman and her daughter, either her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter, right? The pasuk only goes a generation up, but what about a generation down? Well, let's see. Ne'emar kan zima, ne'emar lehalan zima, ma lehalan bita ubat bena, afkan bita ubat bena. Oh, we can learn it from with gezerah shava, from the pasuk in Vayikra 18. Remember, Vayikra 18 only gives the warnings. It doesn't have a punishment. But this pasuk does say, Evat isha ubita, bat bena, bat bita. So this over here explicitly talks about the daughters, a woman and her daughter, and the granddaughters, all types of granddaughters. Okay, so we know that this is prohibited, and it says the word zima right here. And so we could use a gezerah shava to go back to Vayikra 20, where it says zima, not once but twice. And we learned that just like over here, it says ba'esh yisrefu, even though it talks about mother-in-law and not daughters and granddaughters, but we can learn that will be the same punishment from the gezerah shava. Okay, so that's a good way to learn it. Now, minayin la'asot zecharim kinkevot. The Baraita continues with two more paragraphs that are kind of cryptic, and we're going to explain them in a minute. But the first one asks, how do we know males like females? This has something to do with the relatives along the male line versus the relatives along the female line. It could refer to the man, the transgressor's own daughters and granddaughters, and nikevot would be his wife's daughters and granddaughters that she had from a previous marriage. So how do you know all that? Ne'emar kan zima v'ne'emar lan zima. Ma'ala lan zecharim kinikevot, afkan zecharim kinikevot. And it's going to learn it from a gezerah, some kind of similar gezerah shava, from zima here and zima there. The Gemara will explain what Pesukim is talking about. It's not clear. And how do you know that you should go lower and higher? This is referring to some later generation and earlier generation. How do you know that you should compare them? Again, we don't know exactly what it's talking about. The Gemara will give several explanations. Well, it says in these two places zima. So it's the same gezerah shava, and just like there, wherever there is, it equates the lower generation like the higher generation. So too here, we're going to equate the lower generation like the higher generation. And the other way around also, just like in one of these places, it equates the upper with the lower generation. So too here, we equate the upper and the lower generation. That's the end of the Baraita. Let's try to explain. When the Baraita asks, how do we know that males and females are going to have the same law? What is it talking about when it says males like females? Maybe it's referring to his wife's daughter's daughter and his wife's son's daughter. So males and females means which grandchild. So it's his wife who has his wife's granddaughters. Could be his daughter's daughter or son's daughter. A person would be liable and get serefa for being with his wife and one of his granddaughters, either one, from the son or from the daughter. If that's the case, that makes no sense because they are written right next to each other in the pasuk. In Vayikra 18, it says both of these cases explicitly. I don't need to learn this from a gezerah shava of zima, so that can't be what the Baraita is talking about. Ela em hamiv ke em hamoto, or maybe it's trying to tell me that just like one is permitted to be with the wife and the wife's grandmother, and that includes both the wife's mother's mother and the wife's father's mother. So that's the zecharim is the father's mother and the nekevot is the mother's mother. Hashta em chamoto lo kamalan em hamid mihadad Allah. Hold on, we don't even have yet a proof that mother's mother is prohibited. So that you're going to say, we're going to learn the gezerah shava from mother's mother to father's mother. No, we don't have any derivation even from mother's mother. So that can't be what the Baraita is talking about either. Amar Abaye hachi kamar meinayin lasot she'er haba mimenu kesher haba mimenna. Abaye explains it's talking about a relative that's his own biological relative, meaning daughter, granddaughter, which would be prohibited anyway. That's true. But now we're adding another prohibition and a more severe punishment, that if a person is with a certain woman, his wife, and he has a daughter or granddaughter with that wife, then he will be liable to serefa. So how do we know that that's true? Ne'emar kan zima v'ne'emar lalan zima v'chule. Ha b'sher dideh laketiba be'zima. Here's the problem. We learn it from a gezerah shava, but where's the gezerah shava? We know it says the word zima regarding the wife's relatives, but where do we ever see that regarding his own relatives that it says zima? So this is not a good answer. So we challenge Abaye on that. Instead, Amar Rava, Amar li Rav Yitzchak bar Avudimi, Acha henna, Acha zima. Rava comes to the rescue and explains that we can use a a double gezerah shava. It does say the word henna in Pasuk 18:10, which is about the nakedness of your son's daughter or daughter's daughter. That's one's biological grandchildren is prohibited, and it says the word henna. Theirs is your nakedness. It also says the word henna in 18:17, which is a pasuk that we read about a wife and her daughter and granddaughters. So from this gezerah shava henna and henna, I can learn that the man's biological daughters and granddaughters are equated with the wife's daughters and granddaughters. And so that now that I know that, then I can add zima zima to say that not only are they the same, but they're also the same as mother-in-law, which is by serefa. And so too, all of these people will also deserve the death penalty of serefa. Amar mor, minayin lasot lemata kelema'la. My lemata kelema'la. So now, to the end of the Braita, it says, how do we know that the later generation should be like the earlier generation? What is it talking about? What's the later? What's the earlier? Ilema bat bena ubat bita kebita ba'dehadadekajan. If it means the daughter of his son, and that the daughter of his daughter is like the daughter, in other words, the grandchildren, that's the later generation, have the same law as the daughter, and one is prohibited and gets serefa for being with his wife and a daughter, as he would be with his wife and a granddaughter. But they're all included in the pasuk in Vayikra 18. So I don't need to learn it from zima zima. Ela em chami ve'em chamoto kachamoto, hai lemata kelemala, lemala kelemata havai. Or so maybe you can say it's to teach us that the wife's grandmother is like the wife's mother, right? That a grandmother-in-law is prohibited like a mother-in-law. But would you say in that case that we're learning the lower from the upper? It's the opposite. We're learning the upper, the earlier generation, grandmother, from the lower, from the one generation below that, just the mother-in-law. So it's the other way around. So we answer, okay, read it that way. Teneh lema'la kilemata. The grandmother is like the mother. So we change the words, and then it'll fit. But even that's a problem. So how do we in fact know that that's true? We're from Gezerah Shavas Zima Zima. Umashtainhu la ketiba, Zima didhu ketiba. Wait a second, the pasuk doesn't even talk about grandmothers-in-law at all. So it certainly doesn't say Zima by them. So there is no word Zima that we can use regarding grandmothers-in-law to learn that the punishment is also serefa. So we're stuck, and none of those answers work. Amar Abaye Hachikamar, minayin lasot shelosha dorot lema'la keshlosha dorot lemata. Nemar lemata zima, v'nemar lema'la zima. Ma lemata shelosha dorot, af lema'la shelosha dorot. Abaye says this is what the Baraita means. How do you know that you should make 3 generations above like 3 generations below? And so in fact it's saying, how do we learn above from below? The 3 generations is referring to his wife, his mother-in-law, and his grandmother-in-law. So that's 3 generations. So his wife is permitted to him, but then it extends that to a generation before and another generation before for 3 altogether. How do we know that that's true and that that's prohibited like the 3 generations below? That's his wife, his wife's daughter, and his wife's granddaughter. So how do we know that we should extend that which is below and also apply it to above? Well, that's because it says below in Vayikra 18 is the word zima, and it says there a wife and his daughter or granddaughters is prohibited. It only says a prohibition, not a punishment. But we can learn, since it says zima zima, that just like when we go down, it's 3 generations to granddaughters, so too we're going to apply the prohibition above, wife and mother and her mother and grandmother. Now that's the prohibition. Uma be'onesh asa lemata kelemata, af bazara name asa lemata kelemata. And just like with regard to the punishment, we make the above like below. In other words, we don't know the punishment for daughter and granddaughter. Oh, but we're going to make the below like the above. We know above, mother-in-law, the pasuk in Vayikra 20 says, that's serefa, when you go one generation earlier. So we will learn that the punishment applies also to going down, however much you go down, and we know you go down 2 generations from Vayikra 18. So too, regarding the prohibition, we're going to learn that from down to up. All right, we're going to make up like down and say that just like down it went down 2 generations, we're going to go up 2 generations. So the point is that the 2 Pesukim, because they have Zima and Zima, we're going to learn in all directions. And first, that's what the Baraita said first, that we're going to learn Lasot Lema'la Kilemata. We know that down is 2 generations down. How do we know the prohibition applies to up? So we're applying down to up. And then once we know that, we're also going to apply the punishment, but that goes from up to down. And that's the 2 parts of the Baraita. Rav Ashi Amar Leolam Kidekatane. Rav Ashi says we don't have to amend the Baraita. We can leave it in the same order, that is going from down to up first and then up to down after that. Umay lemata be'isur. So if you're not going to change the order in the Baraita, then what does lower mean that we want to say? How do you know the lower from the higher? Oh, the lower is referring to something that's lower in its prohibition. So lower actually refers to grandmother-in-law, and higher refers to mother-in-law. It's not about generations, because it's the opposite. It's a higher generation. But rather, mother-in-law is closer to the guy, and so therefore that will be a higher prohibition, and grandmother-in-law is lower. Now in the end, we're going to learn that the prohibition and the punishment is the same. But in the question part, we're saying, how do you know the lower, the farther away relation from the closer relation? How do you know that a grandmother-in-law is prohibited and would be serefa? Oh, you learn it, and then we learn the Gezer HaShava of Zima, that just like in the pasuk regarding daughter and granddaughter, they're all equated, so too, mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law are all related. But anyway, Rav Ashi is going to learn the same law, but he doesn't have to switch around the order in the Baraita, he can leave the order the same. All right, now, new topic. Ima hi em ima asura, afu em imo asura. There is an interesting thing in the list of arayot in Vayikra, that the pasuk says, Arvat abicha ve'arvat immecha lo tegale, immecha hi lo tegale arvata. It says here, one is not allowed to be with his mother. Okay, so that's definitely a prohibition. In fact, it would be sikila if someone did that. But nowhere in this perek does it say anything about a man being with his grandmother. And so the rabbis actually say that's the Rabbanan. It's not part of the Deoraita first circle, but rather sheni la'arayot is something that is derived. It's prohibited, but it's not the oraita, it is the Rabbanan, which may be surprising, but true. Now the Gemara is going to ask, if you can learn from the Gezer HaShava that we did above with Zima, and we're learning that in lower generations, you go down 2 generations. So too, regarding previous generations, you go up 2 generations. If you're going to learn that, then why don't we use the same thing? All that was for the wife's daughter and granddaughter, so too the wife's mother and grandmother. That's how we learned the wife's grandmother. So the wife's grandmother is included in this derivation and would be prohibited midoraita, and the punishment would be burning. So if you can learn all that, then why can't we use the same methodology to learn that a man who is with his mother's mother also would be prohibited, and should be by burning also, because why not learn the same type of derivation? Amar Abaye, Amar Kera immechahi mishum imo ta mechayevo v'yata mechayevo mishum em imo. Abaye answers, the pasuk says, don't be with your mother because she is your mother. From the fact that it adds immechahi, that means that one is liable for one's mother, but not for his grandmother. By actually saying immechahi, it limits it to only a mother and not a grandmother. That's one answer. Rava Amar, ben leman damar dun mina u'mina, uben leman damar dun mina ve'oki be'atra la'atya. Rava says, I agree that one cannot derive it, but he has a different reason why you cannot make this Gezer HaShava. Now, in general, there is a machloket about a Gezer HaShava. when you're doing a copy paste, you're deriving something from somewhere and then you're pasting it onto the new context. Do you say dun mina, infer from it, and from the context also? In other words, we take everything from the source and we apply everything to the place where we're going to paste. This would be the equivalent of copy paste with formatting. I want everything to come with it. That's one opinion. And Ben Laman Damar is another opinion that says, Dun mina ve'oki be'atzra. Take something from the source, but then put it in the new context. So that would be, text only, copy text only, or paste with current formatting, the formatting in the destination formatting, and put it in there. So that would mean we only derive one piece, but then we have to fit it into how it would fit into the system of the destination. So either way, you cannot make this gezerah shava. And that Ava will explain why it does not work either way. Leman damar dun mina umina mahi em ima asura afhu name em imo asura. So if you want to learn, if you derive in general gezerah shava, not only the thing but also you take the whole original context and you put it into the destination, then you would say, just like with a wife, her mother and her grandmother are prohibited, so too for him, his mother and his grandmother are prohibited. That's the main derivation. That's the dun mina. And then the context, umina, means mahi bisrefa afuname bisrefa. Just like her relatives, her mother and grandmother, if a man who's with his wife's mother or grandmother, the punishment would be serefa. So too, we're going to take the entire context of the type of punishment and apply it also to the man. And that would mean that if a man is with his grandmother, also would be serefa. We're going to learn not only the prohibition, but also the type of punishment. So, leman damar serefa chamura. Now let's see if that works. Can we do that? Let's test it both ways. There's an opinion that says serefa is more stringent than sikila. Well, let's see if it works. Now we know that a man with his mother is sikila. And so that would mean with the mother is sikila and with the grandmother is serefa. And serefa is worse. So you see that already on its face, it doesn't make sense that the punishment for being with his mother should be less severe than with his grandmother. Okay, so ikal mifrach, we can reject this gezerah shava, and we're going to bring 3 reasons why it makes no sense. Ma'alehi sheken imah bisrefa, tomar behu she'imo biskila. First of all, how can you compare her relatives to his relatives? After all, a man with her relatives, her mother is serefa. But his mother is only sikila, which is less. So how can you go and apply context that things are generally more stringent to a place where things are generally less stringent? You can't just copy and paste to somewhere where we know already, we have one filled in, mother is only sikila. Her mother is serefa. So you can't take the more stringent and apply it to the less stringent. Ve'od imo b'skila, em imo b'srefa. Furthermore, what I said before, it doesn't make sense that if a man is with his mother, he gets only sikila, second worst. But if he's with his grandmother, then serefa. So a grandmother should be worse than his own mother. Ve'od mahi lo chalakta ba ben ima le'em ima, afu name lo tachlok bo ben imo le'em imo. And furthermore, if you want to copy and paste, you should do it in the way that the result will be similar. And when it comes to a man's wife, if he's with his mother or his mother-in-law or grandmother-in-law, it's the same punishment. They're both serefa. So too, when you want to paste, you want it to be such that the punishment will be the same. But here, you're going to make a difference because mother is sekila, grandmother is serefa. So you see, it's not the mirror image. Already, it's different. And so you can't possibly take and apply all the formatting to the new context because there's something already filled in and it's out of place. And so it's not really parallel. And for all these reasons, one cannot apply the gezerah shava according to the opinion that says serefa chamura, and within the opinion that we're taking the entire context as well. So let's try the other. Ulman damar sikila chamura, according to the majority opinion that says sikila is the worst punishment. Mehai kushya lo nidona. Although for the first 2 questions, it's okay. Actually, we solved the first 2 questions because here we're deriving from a case that's less stringent, where his wife's mother grandmother is only serefa, and so now we're going to apply it to his mother, which is sikila, which is more stringent. So it makes sense that his grandmother should be more stringent than his grandmother-in-law. And furthermore, it will make sense now, his mother is sikila, which is worse, the worst thing, and his grandmother is only serefa, so that's okay. But you still have the third problem, which is when on the mother's side, they match. Mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law are the same, both serefa. But here, if you're going to apply it to grandmother, his own grandmother, then it's sikila for his mother, serefa for his grandmother, and they don't match. And so for that reason, we cannot make that gezerah shava. And so we see, according to the opinion that says we copy and paste the entire formatting, that you cannot do it. Now let's try the other methodology that says we take just the thing itself, just the prohibition itself, and not all of the context. Just like regarding her relatives, her grandmother is prohibited to him, so too on his side, his grandmother will be prohibited to him. And we'll just learn the prohibition, and we won't have to learn the punishment. But when we put it in its place, we will see that there it was serefa, but here it's sikila. According to the other opinion, where you just copy and paste just the prohibition itself, so then let's try that out. And just like regarding his wife's mother and grandmother, his wife's grandmother is prohibited, so too, imo, his own grandmother, will be prohibited. And so we're not going to take the full context of the type of punishment. So we're only going to learn that she's prohibited. And now when we paste, we're going to say, well, what will be the punishment? Look at the local context, right? Use local formatting, destination formatting, and over there, the wife's mother and grandmother have serefa, but here aval hacha biskila. Here the man's mother, that would be sikila kedashkachan beimo, and so we'll take it and apply the same thing. We'll apply formatting of the destination, and just like a man's mother would be sikila, so to his grandmother would also be sikila. So why can't we make a gezerah shava like that? So now we will show what the problem is with this gezerah shava according to all opinions. Lemandema serefa chamura. If we follow the opinion that serefa is more stringent than sikila, we can reject this kal vachomer for a couple of reasons. Ma'lehi sheken imaha bisrefa tomar behu she'imo biskila. Can you really learn from the prohibition against a man to be with his wife's mother, because after all, that is punished by serefa, which is more stringent. So can you apply that to a man and his own family when if a man sins with his own mother, it's only sikila, which is more lenient than serefa. So then you could argue that a grandmother is prohibited on his wife's side, his wife's grandmother is prohibited to him, because on his wife's side is more stringent. After all, if he's with his wife's mother, that's serefa. And maybe it's permitted for a man to be with his own grandmother because his own mother is only sikila. So you can't learn from a more stringent context to a less stringent context. That's one problem. Ve'od hu kehi mahi lo chalakta ba ben bita le'em ima afu lo tachlok bo ben bito le'em imo. And furthermore, we should be consistent when the way we apply capital punishments in the case of her family compared to his family. And so, when it comes to her family, there is no distinction between the type of punishment whether a man is with his wife's daughter compared to if he's with his wife's grandmother. If he's with his wife's daughter, that is serefa, and his wife's grandmother is also serefa. So it should equal the same. Afhu lo tachlok bo ben bito le'em imo. Therefore, on his side also, it should be consistent, and there should be no distinction between whether between the punishment of whether a man is with his own daughter or his own grandmother. But according to this derivation, you are making a distinction because a man with his own daughter is serefa, and with his grandmother, you said we're going to paste and use the local context, which would make it sikila. So now there's a distinction. His daughter is serefa, his grandmother is sikila, but that's different punishments, and that's not the same as his wife's side, where those two are the same punishment. And so this is a rejection according to that opinion. And if we follow the opinion that says sikila is more stringent than serefa, well then the first question is not a question, because that would mean that a person being with his own mother is in fact more stringent than with his mother-in-law, in which case you can learn from mother-in-law if his mother's mother is prohibited to him, and if with his mother it's only serefa, then all the more so his own grandmother, because his own mother is sikila. So that the first question won't apply, but the second question will. Mehai kushya lo nidona. From this question challenge, we will say that we cannot learn this gezerah shava, because according to this opinion also, there is not consistency. On his wife's side, we have the same punishment for his wife's daughter and his wife's grandmother, whereas on his side, his own daughter will be serefa and his grandmother will be sikila, and that's not consistent. And so that's the reason why we cannot apply this gezerah shava. We'll try out a different gezerah shava on the next daf. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.